I'm Steve Mazur. I'm the environmental specialist in powertrain strategy for Chrysler Group.
Steve, you're sitting right next to an engine here.
This is our 2.4 liter. It's PZEV capable for 2008 model year.
It's a dual variable valve timing, 16 valve, and you've said it's a PZEV.
Yes, PZEV is the strictest emission regulations in the world. It meets what's called super ultra low emission vehicles. And PZEVs also meet the zero evaporative emission regulation for California.
Because California does have the strictest regulations in the United States.
Correct, they do. And PZEV is one component of that. Under the zero emission vehicle regulation, you could either beat with all battery or fuel cell vehicles, but California gives you the option to supplement some of those vehicles with these super clean vehicles called PZEVs. Which means partial zero emission vehicles.
Which is like 99.9% better than anything else that's on the road.
Correct. It's the lowest regulated emissions, by far lower than federal emissions required.
And I guess at this point we need to make sure that people understand that this is evaporative emissions, not CO2. CO2 would be completely different.
Correct. CO2 is related to fuel economy. This is tailpipe and evaporative emissions are at the lowest levels. This engine contributes to cleaner tailpipe and cleaner evaporative as part of the overall fuel system.
So, in California, they did at one point think that they were going to be able to do zero emission vehicles.
Correct.
And then all of a sudden, all the auto manufacturers said, if you're going to do that.
Correct. The law originally stated that you needed a certain percentage of zero emission vehicles, which only meant battery electric vehicle or fuel cell vehicle. And at that time, the battery technology or fuel cell technology was not advanced enough that enough consumers could comply with this. So the law was changed in 2003 to allow these super clean vehicles to do their part and remove as many emissions as they could get off the road.
So now you've got the PZEV coming out, and are you bringing out just as many as needed to meet the requirements, or are you going to do this in all of 2.4 engines?
This is our first PZEV capable engine. It will be rolled out eventually across all product lines where this world engine is available. So we will, of course, be using it to meet the zero emission laws as well, but it'll be available to the normal consumer as their four-cylinder choice of engine.
And now we're looking at the Supreme Court and Congress and everyone else is trying to up the amount of fuel that you get from the miles per gallon you get from a car. And at the same time, the California Air Resources Board, CARB, is saying that they want to decrease the amount of carbon dioxide that comes from a vehicle. The only way you can do that is by increasing miles per gallon. Is that correct?
Correct. CO2 is directly related to fuel economy, and these are more fuel efficient engines than they're replacing, so therefore they are lower in CO2. But to get to those miles per gallon CO2 decreases that has been proposed, you will need this kind of technology plus diesels, hybrids, and even more technology that gets phased in over the years. And right now we're investigating all options.
Do you have any idea how much extra this technology costs on a car?
The PZEV technology?
Yes.
It's in several $100s more, yes.
So if you took that, plus you took the technology that would make a car get 36 miles to the gallon, are you starting to talk about some real money here?
Oh yeah, it's been quoted in our CEO as saying several $1,000s per vehicle to meet some of these proposed regulations.
And do you go now to, because you are working on the regulations with all of these different government entities,
correct.
Do you now have to go to CAFE, to EPA, to California Air Resources Board, and deal with every one of them as an individual entity?
Correct. That's part of the problem, especially with the fuel economy mandate being proposed by an individual state versus a federal government fuel economy regulation. the product plan mix, is too complicated to deal with all these individual states proposing their own different fuel economy mandates.
And plus, you have to also meet CAFE.
All the emission phase-in regulations that are changing between EPA and California.
What about if you just had one entity that you worked with on emissions and just said, okay, CAFE, we've been trying to get off the dependence of foreign oil, which is what CAFE is supposed to do. And that doesn't work no matter what happens, unless it doesn't work by raising the miles per gallon. But EPA scientifically has proved that raising the miles per gallon gets you less emissions. What if you only had to work with EPA and you didn't have to work with CAFE? Would that be actually better?
A single entity and a single law, I think would always be, in theory, preferable versus dealing with multiple regulations and multiple entities. But it would have to be a technology feasible regulations where the regulator is considering how advanced the technology is,
right,
versus setting an arbitrary number.
But isn't that what CARB did? They did set something that was 0 emissions, and then you guys met with them and they said, this is not going to work, and then they backed off and said, okay, what about PZEV then? And you were able to say, okay, that can work?
Yeah, instead of admitting that the law was not a workable one, they had to change it to keep it going, and it was modified so that it still worked for the manufacturers and worked for their constituents.
So, I think if you were able to show CARB or the federal EPA a certain timeline, is that what they're looking for, a certain timeline that these things can be achieved?
Yeah, all the different proposals that they're working with, the regulators or the different legislators. Has been product plan discussions and technology discussions on what's feasible and what time and what kind of vehicles can make that and what kind of vehicles would have to be excluded from the market in order to meet that. So it is a very technical and product plan intensive discussion that's going on.
Now, on your diesel, you also just announced that you're working on B20 diesel standards. Any idea of how difficult that's going to be to get the regulators to regulate the biofuels?
Right now, there already exists a B20 standard that the military, U.S. military has. We're trying to get the ASTM of the U.S. different fuel consortiums to agree to a similar B20 standard. So, from what I hear, possibly this year that we could have a B20 standard that's available here.
Steve Missouri, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.